I stood at the kitchen sink watching Graham's reflection in the window. 23 years of marriage, and I could read his shoulders like a weather report. Tonight they carried something different, not anger, not resignation, but a kind of dangerous curiosity. Carmen. His voice cut through the evening quiet. We need to talk. I turned, dish towel still in my hands. He sat at our small table, a business card between his fingers. Not one of his, something black, expensive looking. I got this today from Marcus at work. He slid it across the wood. Private club, very discreet. The card felt heavier than it should have. No address, just a phone number and a small symbol I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened. Graham, what are you... I want to see something. He leaned back, studying my face. How you act when given real freedom. The words landed like stones in still water. Freedom. As if our marriage had been a cage I'd been rattling against. As if the growing silence between us hadn't been mutual. You don't mean this. I do. His eyes held mine for the first time in months. There's a keycard system. Very controlled. Very safe. But Carmen... He paused, choosing his words carefully. I need to know if you're still the woman I married, or if you've become someone else entirely. I set the towel down, my hands suddenly unsteady. And you think watching me with strangers will answer that? I think watching you choose will answer everything. The card lay between us like a loaded weapon. Outside, our neighbor's dog barked once, sharp and lonely. I thought of the woman I'd been at 48, when Graham first smiled at me across a crowded bookstore. She wouldn't have hesitated to tear this card in half, but I wasn't her anymore. When? I heard myself ask. Tomorrow night? He stood, his chair scraping against the floor. If you're capable of this, do it, but I need to see. He left me alone with the card and the terrible weight of his challenge. The building looked like any upscale office complex. Graham parked under a streetlight, his hands gripping the wheel longer than necessary. Last chance, he said without looking at me. I touched the card in my purse, that small piece of plastic that had kept me awake all night. Is this really what you want? I want the truth, he finally turned. About us, about you, about what we've become. The elevator rode silently to the 7th floor. A man in a dark suit waited in the hallway, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confidence that comes from years of managing secrets. Mrs. Torres? He extended his hand. I'm Daniel. We spoke on the phone. The receipt he handed Graham was simple, understated, like paying for dinner at an expensive restaurant. Nothing to suggest what we were purchasing. The rules are simple, Daniel continued, leading us down a carpeted hallway. Boundaries are established beforehand. Everything stops with a single word. Your husband observes from a designated area. Observes, Graham repeated, until the end. That was your specific request. We stopped before a heavy wooden door. Daniel's hand rested on the handle. Inside are 5 gentlemen, all professionals, all screened, all understanding of the arrangement. His eyes moved between us. This is about trust, communication, and choice. Nothing more, nothing less. The door opened onto a room that breathed luxury and shadows. Warm amber lighting cast everything in gold. Black walls, heavy curtains, furniture arranged for viewing and comfort. 5 men stood near the far wall, older, well-dressed, watching us with practiced discretion. A wooden chair sat in the room's center, facing the space where I would be. For your husband, Daniel explained quietly, as requested. Graham walked to the chair without hesitation. His movements were steady, deliberate. This had been his idea, his design, his need. One of the men approached, distinguished, gray at his temples, wearing a wedding ring that caught the light. "Only what you're comfortable with," he said to me. "Only what you choose." I looked at Graham, seated in his chair like a judge preparing for trial. His face revealed nothing, but his hands gripped the armrests. "I understand," I whispered. The man smiled and touched my cheek, gentle as a question. They moved around me like a careful choreography. These 5 strangers who knew the steps to a dance I'd never learned. The first man's hand remained on my cheek, warm and patient. A second joined him, fingers brushing my shoulder. I glanced at Graham's watch on his wrist, the one I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. Time seemed suspended in this amber-lit room, moving at the speed of breath and heartbeat. "Close your eyes," the first man whispered. I did, and felt myself disappear into sensation. Hands that weren't my husband's, voices that weren't his, a kind of attention I'd forgotten existed. They were careful with me, respectful, but thorough in their exploration of boundaries I hadn't known I'd drawn. When I opened my eyes again, Graham's gaze was fixed on me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. Not confused anymore, angry, but he didn't look away. The third man stepped closer, and I felt something inside me surrender. Not just to them, but to the moment, to the test Graham had designed, to the woman I might have been in another life. What followed belongs to the shadows and silence, to the space between what can be said and what can only be lived. The room held us all, the 5 men, Graham in his chair and me at the center of something that felt both like betrayal and like truth. I moved with them, let them guide me through gestures both tender and bold. Each touch was a question, each response, my answer. The amber light caught everything: skin, fabric, the gleam of Graham's watch as he checked the time. When it was over, the room fell into a profound quiet. The men stepped back with the same discretion they'd shown approaching. Professional, kind, already becoming memory. I walked to Graham on unsteady legs, my hair disheveled, my dress wrinkled but decent. He looked up at me with eyes I didn't recognize. "This was about you," I said quietly. "I wanted you to see me again." He stood slowly, his movements careful and controlled. "I saw," he replied, "and now I can't unsee it." The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. Outside, traffic hummed past the building where ordinary people lived ordinary lives, unaware that marriages could be tested and broken in rooms like this. "Graham," but he was already walking toward the door. The drive home stretched like a country between us. Graham kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. I wanted to reach for him, to bridge the terrible distance that had opened in that amber-lit room, but something in his posture warned me away. At home, he went straight to our bedroom and began pulling clothes from his dresser. Efficient, methodical movements that spoke louder than shouting would have. "Where will you go?" I asked from the doorway. "Marcus has a spare room." He didn't look at me. "I need time to think." "About what? You got what you wanted. You saw me choose." His hand stilled on a folded shirt. "I saw you disappear with 5 strangers while I sat there like some kind of—" He shook his head. "I can't do this right now, Carmen. I watched him pack each item he placed in his suitcase, feeling like another nail in our coffin. The key card from the club sat on my nightstand where I'd left it, a small plastic reminder of the line we'd crossed. "You designed this," I said quietly. "Every detail. The chair, the watching, the rules. This was your test. And you passed it." His voice was flat, empty. "Congratulations." He zipped the suitcase with finality. When he finally looked at me, I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Not anger, not disappointment, but a kind of grief. "I thought I wanted to know," he said. "I thought seeing you choose would answer my questions about us, about whether there was still something worth saving. And now? Now I know there was, past tense." He picked up his suitcase. "I'll call you tomorrow. We need to discuss logistics." The front door closed behind him with a soft click that echoed through our suddenly empty house. I stood in our bedroom, surrounded by the scent of his cologne and the ghost of 23 years, and realized that some tests destroy the very thing they're meant to measure. The key card caught the lamplight, innocent as a credit card, deadly as a loaded gun. I should have torn it up the moment he showed it to me. But regret is a luxury you can only afford after the damage is done. The envelope arrived on Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who asked for my signature with professional sympathy. Inside, legal documents spoke in cold language about irreconcilable differences and asset division. Graham had been thorough. Bank accounts, the house, his retirement fund, everything itemized and split with mathematical precision. Even our wedding china had been assigned a dollar value. The receipt from the club sat beside the papers on my kitchen table, 2 pieces of paper that told the story of my marriage's end, one for services rendered, one for services terminated. My phone rang at noon. "Did you get them?" Graham's voice was steady, businesslike. "Yes." "I've been fair about the division, more than fair considering." "Considering what?" "That I did exactly what you asked me to do." A long pause. "Carmen, don't." "Don't what?" "Don't remind you that this was your idea. Don't point out that you're punishing me for passing your test." "I'm not punishing you." His voice cracked slightly. "I'm protecting myself from having to live with what I saw." I closed my eyes, remembering the weight of his gaze in that amber-lit room, how he'd watched every touch, every surrender, every moment of my transformation from his wife into something else entirely. "You could have stopped it," I said. "One word, that's what Daniel said. You could have called it off at any time." "I know. But you didn't. You sat there and watched until the end, because you needed to see. And now you can't handle what you saw." Another pause, longer this time. "I keep thinking about that woman in the room, the one who moved like she'd been waiting her whole life for permission to be herself. She wasn't my wife, Carmen. She was someone I'd never met. Maybe she was who I always was. Maybe you just never looked. Maybe." His voice was barely a whisper. "But I can't unknow her now. I can't sit across from you at breakfast and not see her with those 5 men. I can't touch you and not wonder if you're thinking about them." The honesty of it hit me like a physical blow. "So this is it? 23 years? And you're throwing it away because you finally saw me?" "I'm throwing it away because I asked to see you and got my wish." The line went quiet for a moment. "Sign the papers, Carmen. Let's end this with whatever dignity we have left." After he hung up, I sat with the documents spread before me like tarot cards, predicting a future I'd never imagined. Outside, our neighbor's dog barked at something unseen, sharp and insistent as truth. I signed the papers 3 days later, my pen moving across the pages with surprising steadiness. 23 years reduced to signatures and initials, witnessed by a notary who'd probably seen 1,000 marriages end this way. The house sold within a month. Graham took his half and moved to Portland, where Marcus had offered him a position. I bought a small condo downtown, close enough to walk to the bookstore where we'd first met all those years ago. Sometimes I pass it on my evening walks, remembering the woman I was then, shy, careful, content to live within the borders of other people's expectations. She would have been horrified by what I did in that amber-lit room. She would have torn up the card, chosen safety over truth, preserved her marriage by preserving her cage. I don't regret what I did. Not the surrender, not the choice, not the moment when I stopped being Graham's wife and became simply myself. For those few hours, I was more alive than I'd been in years, but I regret that he couldn't handle it. I regret that his need to see me came with the price of losing me. I regret that the test he designed measured not my capacity for love, but his capacity for acceptance. My watch, the one that matches the one I gave him, reads 8:47 p.m. as I unlock my front door. The condo is small, quiet, mine. No one watches me here, judges my choices, or asks me to be smaller than I am. Graham calls sometimes, usually late at night when the loneliness gets too heavy. We talk about safe things, the weather, his new job, my work at the art gallery. We never mention the club, the 5 men, or the moment when our marriage cracked open like an egg. "Do you ever wonder," he asked during our last conversation, "what would have happened if I'd said no that night? If I'd stopped it?" "Every day," I told him. "But wondering doesn't change anything." "I loved you," he said quietly. "I want you to know that." Past tense? Present tense. That's the problem. After we hung up, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and thought about love and freedom, about the space between what we want and what we can bear to have. Graham loved me enough to test me, but not enough to accept the results. I loved him enough to take his test, but not enough to pretend it hadn't changed me. Some truths are too heavy for the people who ask for them. Some freedoms come with prices no one expects to pay. I don't regret what I did. But I understand finally why some doors should never be opened, some questions never asked, some tests never taken. The woman in that amber-lit room was real. She was me. And now she lives alone, unashamed and unobserved, in the space between memory and possibility.